Hello and welcome to the Pandaverse. I'm Elgon Williams. I'm here with Christine Gabriel, my cohort in crime. We have with us today Rachel Sharp. She's got a book coming out on Wednesday titled PHAROS, and it's the second book in the PHAETHON series. It is a fantasy book, but it's definitely a different type of fantasy book. Welcome, Rachel.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rachel Sharp. I write science fiction fantasy books that are mostly supposed to be a little funny and also a little odd. My first one in the series was PHAETHON, which I commonly describe as hackers, fairies, sassy, tattooed sirens. And book two, I've been pitching as hackers, fairies, screaming rockabilly neighbors, because you get to meet my new favorite character, Zelda, who I think everyone else also loves, especially the people who already loved Calthine from book one. It's coming out in entirely too few days now. I'm not freaking out. You're freaking out. Everything's fine.
Before we started the recording, I was just telling Rachel that I started reading her book today, and I'm about 15% of the way into it. It's a really good book so far. There's this weird, funky cloud that's trying to attack through a window.
There's only so much plot I can talk about with this book, because not only would it be spoilers for people who can't get the book yet, but it's spoilers for people on this call. So we're going to try not to give anything away here.
Yeah. I liked the first book a lot. It was turned into to an audio book. Mike Eberhard did the narration on the audiobook. He did a really good job of creating the characters and bringing the story to life. So I know he's excited to read this book because he loved the first book. So
He did love the first book.
What was it like doing an audiobook? Because we usually ask the people that have audiobooks.
Audiobook was definitely a big thing for me because, for no other reason, accessibility to the readers. It was really exciting to get to have an audiobook, and with my self-pubs, I haven't done it yet because it's going to be a whole separate fundraising, fund allocating process. But Pandamoon did it all for me in this case, and Mike, who did a wonderful job. Having that out there so the people who either need an audiobook or just want an audiobook because it's more accessible to them to listen to in the car or listen to while they're doing something else, which I know is a thing that I do a lot, is really nice to have, and to be able to answer yes when people ask if I have one, because I've definitely gotten that on my self-pubs and I need to get those done eventually. But Pandamoon took care of it this time and did a fantastic job.
I read the book, but I think it wasn't the final version of the book. I read the book when it was in one of its drafts, one of its editing drafts. And then I listened to the audiobook, and it was enough of a difference between what I'd read before and I could actually visualize better what was going on with it. So, maybe I'm better for audiobooks myself. I love reading too. So I also love fantasy, and your books are a different kind of fantasy book. It's magical realism in a lot of ways. It's kind of urban fantasy, and it's kind of meshed together with some tech savviness about computer hackers.
I think urban fantasy is probably the one that I would use of the common categories for these books. When people ask, I tell them I'm a sci-fi fantasy writer, and they don't necessarily realize that that's all one book. But this whole series started, I pitched the whole thing to a friend at a party sitting on a couch going, hey, what if this, and what if that, and what if the other thing? And because he kept sitting there going, I wrote it. And I'm actually really happy with how book one turned out. I hadn't planned on a book two, but for the first time, not only did people ask me for a book two, but I wanted to write a book two because I wanted to go back into that world and say, okay, these characters are my friends and they get to do more stuff. And that's what we did here. And the people who have been very patiently waiting for this book will probably be happy to hear I'm already working on book three, and it's going to be this year's NaNoWriMo book. So that should be done sooner rather than later. It's going to be a little different. I mean, all three are a little different. The characters who you love will come back. The character I hope you're going to love in book two will come back in book three. The character that Rowena Silver refers to as my chaos raccoon boyfriend kicks off book three. So if you like Cal, you're getting more Cal.
I usually tell people that if there's a first book in the series, you should read that. This is the case here too, but the second book, as far as I can tell, it stands alone well. It fills in enough of the detail from your first book, so you're not really missing any information as this book starts. And it starts out about a year later. The main characters are back. It starts off with Jack and Rosie. There's a scene with Rosie and her mother, because Rosie's gone to visit her mother. I guess it's her mother's birthday. And Rosie goes into hiding to get away from the cousins and the kids and everything that's going on. That's one of the qualities of the things in your book, that the characters have real lives, and you can relate to the real lives of the characters. I think that's what draws me into your books.
I would agree with that. Her first book, your first book was really, really well done. And I do love the realism that you had going on. I just think it's wonderful. And I think that, with book 2, I think your readers are going to be very pleased. I'm excited. That's on my list, my next book to read. I'm currently reading Fur, but I'm really excited to read your second book. I'm really stoked about it.
And I hope you like it. Character and dialogue are definitely two of the stronger points. It's actually one of the reasons I've had trouble writing while all this is happening, is because when someone says, "Where do your ideas come from?" Which is just the most hack question for writers. But the answer is I listen to people talk. It's one of the reasons that living in New York City for a while was really great for me, is because I would listen to conversations going on around me. Some of them really do stick with you forever. If it wasn't for that horse, I wouldn't have spent that year in college kind of stuff. Like 2 teenage girls behind me talking about how pigeons get up to the top of the Empire State Building. Did someone put them there? Can they fly that high? I mean, birds can fly, but like all the way up there? That one's sticking with me forever, but I haven't put it in a book. And then there's some things that my friends say that I turn to them and go, "I'm stealing that." And they're used to it now, so they go, "Okay, yeah, it's yours now. That's fine." And I have a jar full of those. I've always had a jar. It used to be a Hershey's Cocoa tin with a slit cut in the top, and now it's a ball jar that contains sort of like lucky items and also 1,000 little slips of paper that are just things my friends said that I thought were really interesting. And I want to fit them into a book somewhere. And I really need to write more pool tables into my books, because half the things my friends say, it's like around a pool table. One of my friends, I won, which I rarely do in pool, I admit. And she turned to me and she said, "You just kicked my ass. Ass is off to you." And I lost it. And I wrote it down, because that's what you do when somebody says something funny. I write it down, I take it back, I put it in the jar, and then eventually it goes into a book. This is one of the reasons that I think people are really going to like Zelda, who you meet in PHAROS book 2, is because Zelda gets all the best lines that are stolen from all of my weird little scene kid friends.
I think that's awesome. I think that is fantastic.
I think there's a lot of things that I've said over the years that are in people's jars. So...
Yeah, Elgon, I would agree with that.
I mean, my kids used to refer to them as Elgonisms.
Elgonism. Today's Elgonism is.
Yeah,
Hey, it's good to have that friend.
Should make a calendar.
Here we go. We create a Pandamoon calendar with different Elgonisms.
The crazy thing is, though, is that, I usually don't remember the weird things that I say. Other people remind me of them, and then after they remind me of them, I may write them down. But yeah, there's a lot of things that come up in conversation. And Christine and I both work in retail, or at least I used to. I don't work in retail anymore, but you have conversations with customers, and you overhear customers speaking to each other, and that helps a lot too. Yeah. And I know, Rachel, you worked in a bookstore for a while, so I can imagine the conversations you hear at a bookstore.
I had some great ones in the bookstore. Some of my personal favorites were actually about the music, because when I was working, I'd write during the week and work weekends in the bookstore until it became not so safe to do so. But I got to control the music while I was working, and I had all of these strange playlists and the conversations that they would start. And a lot of times somebody who was a couple decades older than me would come in and like look for the speakers and look at me and look for the speakers and go, "This is my music. What are you doing? This is my music." And I would say, "Well, it's good music." And they'd go, "Yeah," and just walk away.
Then they come back again because that's the place that plays the music.
I've had a lot of free time since the viruses attacked everybody. I've started watching YouTube channels and subscribing to people who do music reviews, and most of them are kids that are younger than my kids. They're discovering the Beatles and Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin and, you know, some more obscure bands than those. I mean, those are famous. Everybody's heard of those. It's kind of interesting seeing somebody's first reaction to The Dark Side of the Moon. And I recall a conversation with Roger Waters and David Gilmour that they were talking about the making of Dark Side of the Moon, and the interviewer asked him, when did you know that, you know, you had something magical with this record? Because this record's, it's like what you did before, but it's different enough. I think it was David Gilmour said, you know, we were so close to the project and working on it, and we knew it was good, but we never heard the whole record like somebody hearing it for the first time, because we'd heard everything in its creation process. And he said he really envies people being able to hear that for the first time, because he has no idea what that experience is like.
I think once I joked that I wished I had a second brain so I could reread my books for the first time once they're done and see what it's like as a fresh experience as a whole, because it's a very similar process, I think, for most creative endeavors, possibly except in graphic design. I feel like in graphic design projects, I can work on a thing for a day, go to bed, and the next day when I look at it, it's like I've never seen it before in my life. Not the case with books or music. I know less about music, but certainly in the case of books, I can't read it anymore. I can sit down and read any one of my own books 5 times in a row, and I will have exactly the same experience I did in the process of writing it, and I will learn nothing, which is exactly why I like to have somebody sit down and read it in front of me and be a tremendous creep and just sit there and go, what's funny? What's the funny part? Tell me what the funny part is, because I don't know.
Yeah, I can kind of relate to that. I've had the experience, though, of reading something like a month after I wrote it. And it wasn't something that I thought was actually a keeper thing. And I'm like going through and saying, you know, well, should I just hit delete on this? Or, you know, is there something worth keeping in it? And I'm reading it. And a lot of times I'll say, who the hell wrote this?
Yeah.
You
He's
know,
an empire. That's kind of how I felt about him. You know, I wasn't expecting him to be funny at all, and he's funny. Like, I didn't think he was funny. Everybody thinks he's funny. Or, you know, I'll look at someone who's reading my book, and I'll wait for, you know, a place where I cried when I wrote it. And I'm like waiting, and I'm like, they can cry. They better cry.
It's almost never the thing that you thought was going to work is the thing that I've learned the most after, like, watching people read my books and occasionally bribing a friend with pizza to come over and just sit there on the couch and read it while I do something else and listen to them breathe. And what I think is hilarious is never the thing that's funny.
Yeah.
And
well, yeah,
lucky,
I mean,
it's not the typos.
if you try to
If you're
write,
lucky, it's not the typos they're laughing at. It is at least a joke, but it's never the one I thought was a winner. It's the one that I just sort of.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
well, comedy's difficult to write. And, you know, that's the real gift of a comedian, is being able to come across in a relatable way and seem to be spontaneous and funny, even though they rehearse something, you know, 50 gazillion times. And it's their timing and delivery and everything else that makes it all work. But there's a real gift in being able to surprise people enough that they laugh at something. You know, I don't know if I have that talent. I've had people laugh at things that I've written and things that I say that are spontaneous. But, you know, you're right. Most of the time, I don't intend it to be funny when I'm saying it. And it's only after somebody laughs at it that I go, yeah, I guess that was kind of funny. I mean, you don't know. And
I'm trying for funny sometimes, and sometimes it lands, and sometimes, I mean, I'll settle for the snort. Like, somebody's reading and they go, that's a win. That's good enough. Like, they enjoyed that moment in their head. I'll take it.
I just finished reading Fur by Ward Parker. He has some really funny situations in his books, and they're farcical situations. And that's the humor in it. And it's just the weird assortment of characters that they're dealing with tragic things, but they're dealing with them in completely unique ways, and just the unique settings. And, you know, I used to live in Florida, so I can relate to how weirdness is a natural occurrence in the state of Florida. there is nothing that is defined as normal in Florida. Everything's a little out of sync with reality. I can relate to all that because I lived there long enough to have experienced that firsthand, and I can identify with the characters. In PHAETHON, we're in the big city, and all these things are happening in that environment. So that's what I'm picturing in my head. And even though I've been to New York several times, I've never lived there. I've lived in Connecticut. I've lived, around big cities, in my life. I live in Vegas now, but it's all, if you've never been to New York and you've never lived in New York, you can only picture things that you've seen in movies or on TV or, things like that. And you try to relate to it that way.
And then after you live in New York, you can never do that again.
Yeah.
So I wrote them in Boston. I was living in New York. I'm more sentimentally attached to Boston, but I've never actually lived in it, which might be why. In New York, once you live there, every time you watch an Avengers movie and you go, that's the MetLife building, that's not Avengers Tower, like you've become that annoying person and you're stuck with that for the rest of your life. I'm glad I didn't stay in the city. I did 4.5 years there. Apparently, if you do 5 years, you're a lifer, and I'm not a lifer. I had a really interesting time. I can now go back and say, oh yeah, that time that I was going to book this tattoo artist that I really liked, but she was shooting some reality show, so I had to go with this other person, and that was my life for a little while, and that was odd. It was a good experience. The city is also inaccessible as hell, and I am disabled, and the subway is a nightmare when you're disabled, and I have retired from the city, but I have that experience to draw on, and not all cities are the same, but things like navigation and the frustrations of navigation are fairly universal. And now that I have that to draw on, and I grew up in the middle of nowhere, and I've lived in the desert, and I've lived in the Pacific Northwest, and I've pretty much done my bumming around, and now I have all that experience to draw on and say, okay, well, I want to take them to Phoenix. Let's go. And I did do about a month in Florida once, but it was Gainesville, and it was like when the ska scene was really active, and I don't think it was very typical Florida man experience.
Florida man's more of it's a widespread phenomenon in Florida.
Yeah, it is.
But Florida is a lot of different states that are all congealed into one, because you have most of the people from the East Coast go down to the eastern coast of Florida when they retire or when they move down there. And most of the people from the Midwest go to the west coast of Florida. And then in between the two, you have people that have lived in Florida their whole life. You've got the farmers, you got the ranchers, you got the middle city dwellers, and then you have a lot of transplants that migrate from either coast and kind of mingle together in there. So you've got kind of this weird chemistry going on. It's baffling when you first move there to try to figure it out, and then you finally just give up and accept it.
Well, if you think that's a weird collection of characters, you should try New York City sometime.
The funniest story I have about New York is that I was driving from Connecticut to New Jersey, and I had never driven it before, so I'm like a noob. And I'm going down, 515 out of Connecticut into New York, so I've got to cut through the Bronx to get to the GW, the GW bridge, and I end up in Manhattan. So I missed a turn. Okay. And
You're lucky you didn't end up on Randall's Island.
Yeah.
It happens.
And I ended up in Manhattan, and I'd never been there before, and I didn't want to go any deeper into it. So I looked for a cab that was pulled over at the side that was on break. And I pulled up next to him, rolled down my window, and I said, hey. He said, what can I do for you? And I said, I'm lost. I need to get to the GW, and I know I'm not far away, but it's worth $20 to me if you show me how to get there. He said, okay, give me your money. And thinking back, I thought, I handed a guy $20. He's sitting in a car. He could have just stiffed me. But he actually did. He said, hey, let me out. I'll come around. I'll show you how to go. And he did. He honked at me, and I followed him, and he took me up to the GW, and I got on. I was over. So, the thing about people in New York being cold and harsh, yeah, that happens. But people are people, too.
Right.
And if you Yeah, if you approach people the right way, you'll get a human response from them. That's true everywhere that you go. New Yorkers tend to be a little aggressive because they have to be. You know, they talk fast. They need to get stuff done. They need to get where they're going. You know, that's their whole objective. That's just the way they are. Once you get used to that, you're fine.
In fairness, it's mostly only when they're in public trying to get somewhere too. Like, New Yorkers really aren't any different from anybody else as long as you keep them inside and don't let them talk about the subway. But once you're outside and you're trying to navigate the world, you have the blinders. And I was actually just trying to think of, you said my funniest story about New York, and I'm going, oh God, what is my funniest story about New York? And I mean, there's choices. One time my friend was texting me like, Cyndi Lauper just got on the train with me. Do I go over and say hi? Freaking out. That was pretty funny. But I think as far as laughing at someone, laughing at me is going to beat that, because oh God, I'm actually going to tell this story. So I didn't tell anybody this happened for like 6 months after it happened. And now you're all going to get to hear it. I went to the Algonquin, which is the hotel / bar, mostly bar, where Dorothy Parker used to drink, with a lot of other very famous people, and Dorothy Parker being my personal long dead hero. I wanted to go to the Algonquin and take an author photo and do the whole thing and be a big tourist for a day. And I went to the Algonquin, I checked it out, it was very cool. I saw the mural and the cat. The Algonquin always has a resident cat. When one retires, they bring in a new one. And next door, attached to the Algonquin, is the Blue Bar, which is basically an alley with a bar in half of it and little tables on the other half, which is not uncommon in New York. And the whole thing is blue LEDs. And I have blue tinted contact lenses, and I couldn't see a damn thing the whole time I was in the bar. But I hung out for a little bit anyway. I had a Dorothy Parker, which is made with Dorothy Parker gin. I did say giant tourist, right? I was a giant tourist that day. So I had a couple of drinks at the Blue Bar and decided to walk home. And on the way home, there is a giant Barnes & Noble. And I thought, oh, hey, books, and went into the Barnes & Noble, day drunk, like 2:30 in the afternoon. And I went to the editing section, and I went, oh, I don't have this, and I don't have this, and this is the same color as the new Chicago Manual of Style, and I'll put them right next to each other, and I'll take a picture like this, and then I'll have this complete set. And I have an arm full of editing books, and I go to, like, briskly walk out of that aisle, and I almost plow somebody over, me with my arm full of books. And I go, oh, I'm so sorry. And I back up, and I look up, and it's Idina Menzel. And for a second, I thought, okay, that can't be happening. Like, it just looks like her, right? And she goes, oh, no problem, and keeps walking, and there's two giant dudes behind her. And I'm like, okay, no, just looked like her. Total coincidence. Those aren't bodyguards. What's happening? And I got on the escalator, and I'm going down the escalator, and there's a big banner hanging over the escalator. Signing books today, Idina Menzel. So I just had, a minor heart attack. I went home. I didn't tell anybody that happened for a good 6 months. And now you
get
all
to
know.
meet her. You talk to her.
I guess technically that is true.
I nearly knocked her down on her ass, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm like 5'8"-ish, and she is not, and that was a surreal moment for sure. I don't know if it's the funniest New York story, but it's up there.
Well, things like that happen in New York, I'm sure, to people, and it probably happens more often there because there's a greater chance of you meeting those people because they live there.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no,
Apparently I could see one of Beyonce's apartments from my apartment at one point. I didn't really know what to do with that information. It doesn't mean anything to me, but it's an interesting fact.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely celebrities kicking around, most of whom I couldn't name or recognize if you paid me.
You could always say, hey, I live down the street from Beyonce.
I guess. But in New York, a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And some of the funny stories have nothing to do with celebrities or Broadway or anything New York specific. I guess a lot of them are subway related. I almost got eaten by the 4 train once. The door malfunctioned, and then the back seats of the train fold up, and some of them do and some of them don't. And first the door tried to eat me, and a very tiny lady jumped in and like grabbed the door and kicked it and saved me from the door. And then I went to sit down and the seat folded up on me. So the 4 train was out to get me that
It
day.
wasn't your day.
Gosh.
That's a thing that happened.
Wow.
One of the stores I worked in the past, there was a little old lady. I mean, it's a tragic thing, at the time for her, but she was like 90 years old, and she was one of those people who shuffle walk, and she was moving so slowly that the motion detector on the exit door didn't pick up her movement, and it closed on her, and she fell down and broke her hip.
Oh my God.
Thinking of it conceptually, if you're into dark humor, it's funny that she was moving so slow she couldn't set off the motion detector. But it's terrible what happened to her. So, I mean, you have to
can't
be.
help but think of it from a design perspective. Oh, I don't know. I think a lot about how technology is failing us because we are failing it, and we're failing it to teach it that people other than sort of your standard straight white male exist. Like motion sensors and cameras that won't detect people with even slightly darker skin. And disability is a whole other thing in that, and that counts. Like if you are too slow for the door, then the door is not right.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
we're
Yeah, well,
teaching
we had
machines,
to-
and we're
we had
testing
to-
machines on coders, and so many of the coders are
Yeah,
this
we had to
very
have,
narrow set of people.
a technician come in and reprogram the thing, to be a lot more sensitive. And they rolled that out throughout the company afterwards, because they just, I mean, when you have a door installed, I guess you assume that the company's designed it to work, normally, and it's
And
not
they
going to cause
did.
any problem.
They designed it to work normally.
Normally.
They tested
Yep.
it on 3 nearly identical people with nearly identical walking paces, and it didn't occur to them to test it on anybody else, and they shipped it.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's sometimes why doors close on children. My son, a door closed on him when he was very little. Same thing. He was a little slow, and it got him.
Well, he might have been too short to trip the sensor on the door.
Yeah. Yep.
And having this conversation, and is anybody else a little bit concerned about self-driving cars?
I am. I wouldn't let something drive itself. But even out here, you see people in their cars, and they don't even have their hands on the wheel because they're driving a Tesla or something, and it's driving them.
Yep.
And if everything's going normally, and it's a nice, bright, sunny day, and there's nothing unexpected happening, that's probably okay. But you need to be paying attention to what's going on the road, because you're the fail-safe to keep disasters from happening.
Just in case somebody forgot to program the camera to recognize anyone under 4 feet tall.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, eventually the machine learning will probably pick up everything so that it's 99 and 44 100% accurate.
I mean, we're
But-
teaching it to be
but it's
smarter and
never-
smarter.
but
Every
it's
time you
never
fill
gonna
out one
be-
of those things that says, show me the pictures of stoplights.
Yeah.
We're working on the machine education, but when we say machine learning, I don't know if we always mean what we should mean.
Right.
And it's going to be a process to find all of the gaps that we've created by only testing on this very narrow set of people. And I guess this is why I write sci-fi fantasy with scary tech in it. I spend entirely too much time thinking about these things.
But they make sense though. Like I guess I've never really put much thought into that until the way you word that, it's kind of terrifying. Just to know like the gaps, like you said. Because they're there.
The average person, which none of us are average. We've gone over that many times. Being normal and average are things that writers avoid. The average person probably thinks it's safe. Probably thinks,
Right.
oh, well, they've thought of everything. These really smart people that went to MIT or whatever program this stuff all the time,
It's
and
so cool.
they know what they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
and they go on like that, and then you end up with situations like, several years ago, I remember my oldest daughter came home from school, and she was upset because she got a B. She always wanted to get A's. She got a B on an English paper that she'd spent a lot of time working on. And I said, what was wrong with it? And she goes, I don't know. And, I went through and I read it, and I looked at what the teacher had highlighted that was wrong with it. And I said, well, yeah, the teacher's right. She goes, well, I know she's right, but I said, well, you know all these things too, because your grammar is actually better than mine most of the time. So, I mean, why is this happening? And she said, well, I ran it through spell check and I ran it through the grammar check and I corrected everything that it suggested. And I said, and then you turned it in without reading it again. And she goes, well, yeah. And I said, why? She goes, well, Word said it was okay. And I said, well, the problem is you're trusting a programming language nerd that works for Microsoft to know English grammar. And those are completely mutually exclusive things.
In fairness, there are a very, very, very few people who can do both. I am not really a programmer nerd. I learned the basics of C# and Python, and I can make Tetris from scratch and stuff like that. I learned enough so that I would know what I was talking about when writing science fiction and fantasy, because
Right.
that sort of thing's important to me. But even before I did that, I started with a premise of not trusting the machine. And then the more I learned about technology, the less I trusted the machine. And it's not always important stuff. People encounter problems with a thing that they assumed was as smart as they were, and suddenly they realize it's not.
Right.
And it's something as simple as trying to unlock your phone with your face when you have to wear a mask. That's a thing that people have been encountering a lot. And I don't unlock any of my devices with my face.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's
you
part of
can-
the reason. And another part of the reason is the computer can decide that the camera doesn't work, or that
Right.
my face isn't my face. I can baffle a video camera with a laser pointer. I can baffle a video camera with a sock. Like, people think that the technology is perfect until they find out otherwise. And I assume that the technology is dumb as a box of rocks until it can prove to me that it isn't.
Right. That's a better approach to it. My phone the other day stopped working. I didn't have I have like the fingerprint scanner turned on it, but I hardly ever use it. It was telling me that I needed to hold the phone away from me. I didn't even know that I had that feature turned on to recognize my face. I went in and I turned it off because it wasn't working properly. And then it asked me if I wanted to use the iris scan. The iris scan's actually better than the face recognition in terms of, the percentage of times that it gets it right. But you have to hold your phone at a weird angle for it to see your eyes properly. So what good's that?
Well, it's hard to say if it's an improvement or not. Even, like, I haven't seen a lot of testing done for the iris scanner, but as far as the face scan, once again, anybody who has a skin tone that is not the same as the 3 programmers they tested it on is going to have problems with the face scan
Right.
half the time, give or take. And that's exactly the kind of thing that makes you go, some things humans are better at. We just are. And when we start to assume and start to advertise products as being just as smart as you think it could possibly be, we're wrong. We're always wrong.
I wish you a lot of luck with the launch on your book. I know Christine and I will be supporting you on it. I think it's a great book. I can recommend it already, and I've only read about 15% of it.
Well, then don't recommend it yet.
Well, I'm recommending it because so far it's as good or better than PHAETHON was, and PHAETHON was outstanding.
Yeah,
So,
PHAETHON's good.
Well,
and I've heard rumors from the people who did the editing on it that this one's better. So
I hope it's good. I hope people like it. So far, I've gotten a lot of positive feedback, and at least a couple people who read it and sent me screen caps, and just like their caption on it was something like screaming, or just a string of emojis, and that's usually positive feedback. It's going to be a weird book release. I don't really get to, leave the house and show it to people and sign it for people and all that stuff this time, but we're doing this, which is a good start. And other than that, it's just going to be me on Twitter going, the book is out in 3 days, the book is out in 2 days, the book is out in 23 hours, and just losing my mind a little bit at a time. So that's going to be fun. That'll be a fun process. And then once the book is out, and it's been out for about 24 hours, I won't care anymore, and I'll be working on the next project, and all of that anxiety will have been for nothing. So yeah, book launches are great. Book launches during a pandemic are just double great. And the only thing that matters is whether or not people get some enjoyment and fun out of the book. And I think they will. So it's not all bad.
it'll be available on Amazon as of Wednesday at the wee hours in the morning. You can also get it from the Pandamoon website. I'll put links in the description for the video so that you don't have to search for it. And the book again is called PHAROS, and it's by Rachel Sharp. You actually have a pendant that looks like your Fae from
Yeah, I don't know if
the
you can
first
really
book.
see this.
Yeah, that's on the cover of her first book, pretty much.
Yeah, my partner made this for me as a gift slash, I don't know, author encouragement, which usually comes in the form of snacks, but this is pretty special too.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, and again, good luck with the launch.
Thank you. I hope everybody likes it.
Bye.
Bye.